Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our meeting. Betsy, would you like to do roll call, please?
Here.
Sounds like it is.
Thank you. City of Menifee,
There we go.
City of Canyon Lake, Temecula, Pachanga Band of Luisaño Indians, Pala Band of Mission Indians, U.S. Congressman Ken Calvert. Jonathan, they should be on the phone. State Senator Jeff Stone's office, County of Riverside. Olivia is going to be late. She'll be here. Riverside County RCTC, WRCOG, Southern California Association of Governments. SCAG, they would also be on the phone. Caltrans, I know they are here. District 8, District 11 is here as well. Sandag, Camp Pendleton, County Riverside Department of Transportation.
Very much.
Activated a conference call and they didn't
Daniel Tran with SCAG.
Has joined the conference.
Welcome. Okay. Mr.
Thank
McGee,
you.
would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, sir? Valerie, do we have any public comments at this time?
We do. We have one. Would you like me to read the public comment?
Please.
A total of 15 minutes is provided for members of the public to address the committee on items that are not listed on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. If you desire to speak to the committee about an item not on the agenda, a request to speak form may be filled out and filed with staff, me, liaison. When you are called to speak, please come forward and state your name for the record. For all other agenda items, a request to speak form may be filed with staff liaison prior to the committee addressing the item. There is a 5-minute time limit for individual speakers.
Thank you.
First speaker, David Maddox.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is David Maddox. I'm a resident of Temecula, and I'd like to make a few suggestions. So I think this task force could benefit from keeping a more organized list or table of the current pending legislation that pertains to our mission. And to illustrate what I mean, I've put together an example, which staff has kindly made available as a handout. So essentially what this is a legislative matrix based on the one that RCTC uses. And I want to emphasize a couple things first. First, that the information is incomplete. And second, that I don't presume to tell any of you what your politics should be. These bills are nuanced, of course, and they have ramifications outside of just the freeway. But my goal here is to draw your attention to these bills and to give you something to maybe take back to each of your local agencies. And anywhere that you find that the interests of your local constituency align with those of the broader one, I would encourage you to write letters of support or opposition. I don't know that we necessarily need to adopt a formal platform as a group. RCTC and WRCOG already do that to an extent. But I would like to see more involvement from the cities and tribes and committees represented here today. I'd like to walk through an example and illustrate why this matters. So Temecula recently approved plans to construct a 4-lane highway that we call the Western Bypass. This new road will connect to 79 South, curve north along the hillside, and run parallel to the I-15. Now, at our previous meeting, we heard that local trips account for roughly 10% of the traffic on the Temecula section of the I-15. The Western Bypass could significantly reduce that friction if we're ever allowed to build it. See, the problem is that the project is currently tied up in CEQA litigation, and unfortunately, this is not uncommon. At the first meeting of this task force, RCTC Executive Director Ann Mayer explained that our biggest challenge on environmental documents at this point are the lawsuits that follow the approvals. Now, there's a bill that addresses this issue. That's AB 3027 on the chart. The city of Temecula recently wrote a letter in support of this bill, but unfortunately, the bill is struggling to make it through committee. It failed its most recent vote, and without more support, its future looks uncertain. This is exactly the kind of bill that should go on our watch list. It's a bill that I think a lot of us would support, and there are several more like it. So in closing, I just want to encourage you to take a closer look at some of these, and I want to express my thanks to all of you for your time and for your commitment to this task force. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, one more, David Young.
Good afternoon, Mr. Young.
I'm a resident
Can you speak into the microphone, sir?
I'm a resident of Temecula, and I probably maybe the only one who actually watched the YouTube video of last meeting you had. And a couple of things stuck to my mind. The gentleman that did the study mentioned that the freeway is designed to handle 7,000 to 8,000 cars for 4 lanes per hour. But he didn't mention what you would expect it or to see if you have 3 entrance ramps within 3 miles. I can't imagine that you could still have 7,000 cars an hour. And his suggestion was that maybe you spend some time and make changes to like ENES, traffic lights and stuff like that to get the 5 or the 10%, or let's say 500 cars off of the freeway. I would hate to see the city do all this and think that you're going to change the traffic on the freeway. I just think that, you know, maybe the 5,000 cars is normal when you have 3 entrances, and that, you know, maybe an extra lane is a better answer than trying to fix something that's not going to make any change. That's it.
Thank you, sir.
No, I'd just like to acknowledge that Lieutenant Brian Gonzalez of CHP is here on the task force now as well.
Sure, he was copying license plates when he was out in the parking lot. So, okay. So, seeing no more speakers, Mr. Belinsky. Thanks, sir. Mr. Belinsky, I want to take the opportunity to thank you for all that you've done over the last month for our corridor, for our cities, and bringing some good news to us today. It's appreciated.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for allowing me an opportunity to share some information with you. Hopefully, I will provide some new information to you that you may not have been aware of. And I'm not sure how to move this thing forward. This? Okay. Green? Makes sense. Green go. So this first slide really kind of, previous slide, showed all of the emblems of those partners that are involved in this discussion. And I just want to extend my appreciation to all of you assembling in this kind of forum to talk about traffic in the Temecula Valley. We could talk about the logo for this later, but I really want to focus on I-15 under Caltrans control. So I do, this is just an overview of what I want to talk about today. And this is not going to be extended, long discussion. So existing and future traffic, what you experience today and what we expect to see in the not too distant future. Our role in transportation, some I-15 operational improvements that are either in construction, being developed, or that we are going to propose. Again, some existing projects. Some capacity improvement concepts, and then some next steps. So first of all, and everybody that here drives through I-15 experiences this situation daily. What this shows is a level of service at different segments, and it includes a portion of 215 as well. And it provides the level of service for the AM peak and the PM peak. We usually look at a 1 hour time period, and as most of you know, the peak is probably more than an hour in any one direction at any one time during the day. But this just gives you an idea of what the existing conditions are from a level of service concept. And that's today's numbers. And then you look at 2040, which is not that far away. And you start to see the thing entirely break down. This level of service, or these level of service identifiers, are including the construction of phase 2 of French Valley Interchange as an existing condition. So just keep in mind, this will be even with French Valley phase 2 in operation. And you can see a lot of F's included in there. And if you remember high school, A was a good grade, F was not a good grade. So I want to talk about funding. And one of the funding programs that is utilized for capacity increasing projects is what we call the STIP. And I know a lot of you know what the STIP is, some of you may not. So that's the State Transportation Improvement Program. I'm not going to go into detail. I don't want to put anybody to sleep. But I do, does this have a laser? I want to point out one thing. So 10% of the STIP, which is broken up into north-south, we have the ability to program for capacity increasing projects. The rest of the STIP is managed by the local transportation agencies, in this particular case, RCTC. So what can we do with the other programs that we manage? The State Highway Operation Protection Program, that is the primary funding program that we have available to us, Caltrans, which is, the purpose of that is really to maintain the existing infrastructure that is in place. And that includes all of these elements. And if you look at the bottom of that list, operational improvements is one of them. So we can make operational improvements on the existing system to facilitate the movement of traffic. And some of those operational issues that we see out on 15, of course, are all of these. Weaving, merging, local system capacity, as well as the I-15 capacity, which was mentioned by one of the speakers earlier. Traffic incidents, all of us experience impacts to our travel when there's an accident. And then the grade coming up the hill at a Rainbow. So this just shows some of those areas and highlighting some of those areas where we actually do have those type of operational issues. And I think that there are some videos, no sound, just videos. This is intended just to put you back in the driver's seat for a couple minutes. So that's the weaving that's taking place. And it's not that great, but you could see in the distant portion the congestion that's existing in both directions. And I apologize, this isn't the greatest video. This is an older one. But I'm sure you're all familiar with Rancho and the backup onto the freeway that exists. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the incline, the grade coming out of Rainbow and the merging of the vehicles that are using that inspection facility. So what are some of the operational improvements that are available to us that we can look at and funding those out of a program like the SHOPP? All of us love ramp metering, right? I don't see a lot of heads shaking, but ramp meters do have their place. They have their function. And the purpose is really to manage that traffic coming onto the main line so that we don't have congestion or we reduce the amount of congestion on the main line. Auxiliary lanes, those are lanes between interchanges that provide for weaving opportunities and merging opportunities. Acceleration lanes, so for example, at Rainbow, adding a lane for an acceleration for those trucks. Addressing incident management, so in this particular case, having shoulders wide enough so that the emergency responders can access the location where the incident takes place. Providing traveler information, which include cameras and changeable message signs, to inform travelers as they drive through the corridor, and then, of course, enforcement. So some of the upcoming projects that are being developed, and I believe most of you are probably familiar with the French Valley Parkway project. This project has been in development for a number of years. The first phase of that project has been constructed and is in operation. The second phase of that project, which is the blue that you see on the slide, that is in design and is expected to be in construction sometime in 2020. And then the third phase is the green portion, which is probably over $100 million. This second phase is what we call a collector-distributor network. So that will minimize or eliminate in some locations the merging and weaving that takes place on the main line. So it separates that merging and weaving from mainline operations. Ramp meters. So at these three interchanges, if we start at Temecula Parkway, that one is being constructed as part of that project, Temecula Parkway project. The Rancho Road, we do not have currently a project to install ramp meters, but that could be one that would be under consideration. And then Winchester would have ramp meters installed as part of the French Valley Parkway project. Phase 2. Adding auxiliary lanes, and I mentioned auxiliary lanes are really additional lanes that provide for that weaving, merging opportunity between existing interchanges. So these are some of those locations. Adding an acceleration lane on the grade coming out of Rainbow, out of the inspection facility. And then if you look back at the Rainbow Valley Boulevard interchange, the possibility of adding a ramp meter at that location. And that may sound odd at this point, but like water, people find the point of least resistance. And if we meter all the other ramps, there's going to be people that are going to take advantage of those locations that don't necessarily have ramp meters. So capacity increasing. So this would be funded out of the STIP primarily. So adding general purpose lanes, adding HOV lanes, express or toll lane facilities, and then one that we've looked at a little bit recently is considering a reversible HOV lane. So that would be a single lane in the median that would open for those time periods where you have a large differential between one direction or the other. Which, if you look at the 2040 numbers, there's not a lot of differential between those two directions in 2040. Another thing that is currently being piloted in District 11 is utilizing the shoulders for buses. They are having great success. I'm not sure which, I can't remember which route they're using that on, but they have prepared a draft report and are expecting to produce a final in the not too distant future on the benefits of utilizing those shoulders for buses. One of the problems that I see with this is we don't have the structural section or the thickness of the asphalt on the shoulders like we do on the main line. And that's really a cost-saving measure that was implemented years ago when the freeways were built. So we would have to reinforce that shoulder if we were to go with this option. So estimated costs. And again, to me, with the exception of the last one, are all relatively low dollar improvements that can, I'm going to knock on wood, there's no wood around here, but I'm going to knock, that can be implemented in a relatively short period of time. Not 14 years like some of the other projects that have been in development. And looking at the capacity increasing, I'm saying tens of millions to hundreds of millions, and that's going to be dependent upon what strategy is identified and proceeds forward. So I talked about traveler information. So these are some cameras that are being installed currently, and we expect them to be completed and in operation by the end of this calendar year. And they will all be interconnected and then being able to be seen out of our Transportation Management Center in Fontana. I think one of those changeable message signs, if I'm not mistaken, is already in place. And then I just wanted to talk briefly about latent demand. So obviously we have a lot of traffic in this valley, a lot of the traffic that uses not only the interstate but the local transportation network. When you start to open up capacity in one, then like I said earlier, like water, people flock to the area of least resistance. So if we add a lane on the freeway, that capacity gets used up relatively quickly. So these are some of the next steps, and maybe this is where this group can really help. Analyzing, first prioritizing projects that have the biggest benefit, and have some staff here that can talk a little bit more about the benefits of each one of these options. And then analyzing those to see what the impact is, not only on the interstate, but on that local network. And then explore funding opportunities. And I talked about the SHOPP, and I talked about the STIP, but there's also funding opportunities out of Senate Bill 1, and in particular, the competitive grant programs that are included in that program. Once we get a project ready to go to the shovel-ready, they can become very competitive depending on how they compete against projects elsewhere in the state. So with that, questions, suggestions?
I have one. Is it all right? You said the bypass lanes for French Valley, the ones were blue. You said 2020. So I see that. Is there any way to do the metered on Winchester now? The metered on Winchester is the main issue. I drive this thing every day, multiple times a day. I go to San Diego and back. I own a transportation company. So it's all about Winchester flow coming onto the freeway going north. Everybody's weaving. People won't stay in their lanes. They're trying to get over to get to 215, even though they have 2.5 to 3 miles still to get there. They just can't help themselves but get in that lane.
I don't see us being able to deliver that any faster than French Valley. The reason being is that we would have to consider that a brand-new project, so we'd have to go from the beginning. We can work with the city on identifying maybe that as a priority, if that can be installed earlier on in the duration of the project or the life of the project. So that's a good suggestion.
All the projects that you mentioned, are the environmentals something that will have to be dealt with, or are they already dealt with in the current?
No, the environmental, these would all be brand new projects. We would have to start from the very beginning.
So we have to start fresh with all the environmental hurdles?
Yes.
Mr. Nagar.
Just a quick comment. It should be noted that for that phase 2 of the French Valley Parkway, $32 million that we expect to get from part of the STIP hangs in the balance if SB 1 gets repealed, gets on the November election. And so we've taken a position in support of Prop 69 that passed, which is good. And now everybody here in the valley is going to have to take somewhat of a position or no position on SB 1 if it makes the ballot.
That is a valid point.
I don't think there's a doubt that SB 1 is going to make it on the ballot. I believe that it will be there. I had the opportunity to discuss this multiple times with Ann Mayer, the executive director of RCTC, who's on board. I can tell you as chairman of the RCA, I'm going to do everything in my power to remove any impediments that are in a way to get this done. And I think that comes down to the committee also taking the effort to reach out to our representatives, Calvert, Mr. Hunter, Diane Feinstein, and say, look, this has got some urgency behind it. Ann indicated to me right before I walked into the meeting that she is on board to work with us in any way we can. I think that this is going to be the appropriate agency, and we will look for peripheral funding. If SB 1 goes away, we can't stop. So at some point, we need to step up as a coalition of cities in Riverside County and say, we need this funding and we need to find it. I think the suggestions you have here are great suggestions. My concern is getting back to the lanes that can be done by 2020. Is there funding in place already for that was earmarked at any given time? Or
For French Valley?
No.
Yes.
Fantastic.
But as was mentioned, if SB 1 does not continue on, there is a potential that can get unprogrammed, that portion.
Right, and that was 31 million, correct?
Correct.
So I guess
So that's a
32 million. So I guess we'll all be
pretty significant.
hunting for 32 million if SB 1 goes away. So, and I think that's kind of the direction we need to go in.
And keep in mind that if we did, the longer delay is, the higher that cost goes up.
Understood. So I think that's one of the things that in our guiding principles that we should be looking at is Plan B. And I never count my eggs before they've hatched, so for chickens.
A couple of quick things. A question for our Public Works Director, Pat Thomas, here in a second. What's the status of, Pat, what's the status of Phase 2 project? It's designed, have we done the CEQA work, or are we going to start the CEQA work in 2020?
Well, we're doing some additional CEQA work just to revalidate what was done previously, but we are actually in the PS&E stage, so we're working on the actual construction documents as we speak.
So we get the money, we're starting the project.
Correct.
Okay. And then the second thing I want to bring up, every one of us has to go back to our own jurisdiction, deal with the way our citizens feel about certain things, and there's great sensitivity to that. RCTC has already taken a position, I don't know how to put this, against the repeal of SB1, okay? And there were some agencies that voted no, but it passed pretty much overwhelmingly. This panel may want to consider a similar resolution of a coalition of cities to support, or however we want to word it, to support the non-passing of the repeal of SB1.
Okay, any other questions?
I
Mr.
have-
McGee?
Thank you. I just want to address the SB1 issue with respect to what my colleague had to say about the position that RCTC took. A third of the commissioners left the room when it was time to vote. So to say that it was an overwhelming support, that it should not be repealed, is not an accurate statement. I was one of the ones that voted that I believe SB1 should be repealed, and I believe the polling is going to show you that most people who are now filling up their gas tank or registering their vehicle are in shock by what the legislature has done. And if they have an opportunity at the ballot box to change that and put money back in their pocket, I think they're going to do it. So to Mr. Ingram's point, we need to be working on Plan B.
And one other question. You control the signal at Winchester getting onto the northbound, correct? Is that your signal right there at the corner?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a way to click that thing to where you can't turn it, until it's red or stutter it or something, to where it would ease the entry instead of
So
everybody's jamming into that?
no turn on red, is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, I know people will hate that, but you know what? The people on the freeway won't hate that. Just another way, a measure until this other thing goes. Because what I'm understanding here is you're saying 2020 for those lanes, but we don't even have the CEQA done on that yet, or is that already
No,
finished?
CEQA's been completed.
Oh, so it's already
So
done.
you're
So
now,
phase two's
they're now
done.
in the design phase, so they're
Awesome.
completing the design, they're obtaining the environmental resource agency permits,
Right.
acquiring all the necessary right-of-way, which I don't believe there's a whole lot of right-of-way needed in that.
No, we're set with Phase 2. We do need some additional right-of-way for Phase 3, but Phase 2 is cleared.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wondered about that.
So, just so you're clear, though, when I say 2020, that's begin construction.
Right,
And
I
it's
got that
probably a
part. I'm just talking about something
two-plus-year
in the
construction
median.
window.
I'm just talking about something in this, before that, like we did on Winchester when turning onto Winchester off of Inez, it's turn on red only type of thing. It does slow it down, and it does help the merge onto the freeway, but that thing is so plugged. I mean, that's the only other way I think you can fix something temporarily till those things get built.
We can certainly look at that.
And signage. I think that signage becomes an issue where we need to look. And from a CHP standpoint, better enforcement on trash trucks, diesels, and people that are hauling heavy vehicles on the northbound side of the 215 that are out in the third and fourth lanes passing each other because they don't have the power to handle that grade. And it's been a concern for a while that you see a lot of people shooting out and darting around trucks to get into those far left lanes. So is that something that we can make you more acute to, or is just from a manpower standpoint you have the ability?
We do have the ability, and I would actually like to suggest it's perfect. Maybe some additional signage on the northbound 15 as you approach. I guess that would be just south of Winchester. But as you approach there, maybe a black and white sign could be to where, to indicate where trucks are allowed to be. Because I think that for some truckers, it could be a little confusing as far as where they need to be when they come through. And I think that could alleviate maybe half of them. I don't know, I'm just guessing.
I think you're correct.
But that
Also on
could.
the southbound, traveling up the 15 into San Diego. My grandkids and I counted 453 trucks that were between Murrieta and San Diego going to SeaWorld. And you could see there was an issue with that. And I know we need trucks. They're our lifeblood here because we don't have a rail system. But we also have to have, the way station has been an issue with me as long as I've lived here because they don't have the momentum that they need to take that grade. And what Caltrans is suggesting with that is genius. I would have built that in when the way station was done if I could see into the future, I guess. So, and this brings me to the point on AB 3027. The gentleman, our speaker earlier, is absolutely right. This is something that we need to look at from a process standpoint with the agencies and the CEQA lawsuits, that we need to actually do something about this and stop these frivolous lawsuits so that we can move forward, because it's impacting the quality of life of everybody that lives in Southwest Riverside County, all the way from Corona to San Diego County line. Mr. Ciarda.
I have another question for you regarding the scope of the, not the scope, but the effect of the projects that you're talking about. There's two different things going on in this valley, as you're probably pretty much aware of. During the weekdays, it's commuter traffic that's being hampered a little bit, or a moderate amount of it, by destination traffic. On weekends, it's completely the opposite. It's destination traffic with some commuter traffic going through that is creating an equal, and in fact a larger problem. As you can see, the freeway backs up all the way up into Lake Elsinore practically. Are these strategies effective for both, or are they more effective for the commute traffic during the weekdays as opposed to weekends?
No, I think they're effective for both. You know, the issue, of course, is population. The issue is freight. You look at the projections of population growth in California, by 30 years from now, it's supposed to double in California. Now, a lot of that growth is going to be where? It's going to be in Southern California. So we're going to have significant growth. That's why you saw those 2040 level of service number or value so low. If you look at freight is supposed to increase by 50% in the next 30 years. 50% more. You counted how many trucks?
453.
Add 50% to that in the future.
I have one more question. The new cameras that you guys are installing right now, that's what's going on right now, right? Those underground guys all along the freeway?
Yes.
When you guys are monitoring that in your location in Fontana, do you also are able to turn those signals on at each on-ramp or off-ramp? I mean, on the on-ramp, the meters, do you watch that from there? Is that what that's for, to help you with that type of thing? There's an interesting thing on Murrieta coming on California Oaks. Every Saturday morning, that one that's coming south is on. Every day that I come down here during the week, it's never on and it's packed. And I always wondered what was so funny, but the last 2 days, it was actually running and actually smoothed out people getting off at Murrieta Hot Springs Road, and truckers, a lot of the truckers will get off there, swing around, get back on the freeway, and that way they can make that off-ramp at Winchester. So I've been watching every morning, it's the same pattern. But I just noticed for the last 2 days, you guys have been turning that thing on. I just wondered if that's what those cameras, is that the purpose of those cameras, to be able to monitor those type of issues?
So I'll let Tom speak to that.
What's going on? So the purpose of the cameras is to really manage incidents. We have the ability to turn on ramp meters remotely, but we don't. They're generally traffic responsive. So as traffic goes up, they turn on. If it's turning on when no traffic's there, give us a call because there's something wrong. So that's basically the answer.
Okay. Mr. York.
So John, back to that 10% of the STIP that you have for operational dollars, the examples that you shared with us?
Well, let me just correct something you just said. For operational improvements, we can utilize the STIP, or the SHOPP.
Okay. So
STIP would be for capacity.
Okay, so of those two pots of money in that list of projects that you provided, what can this committee do to assist you to bring those up to the forefront or help prioritize those? And what is a reasonable time frame?
Okay, that's what I would like, is if this committee we could put our heads together and identify which of those options has the best bang for the buck. We would need to conduct some additional analysis to get that priority list and identify which ones could go forward. Of course, we still have to compete for money out of the SHOPP, but I think that we can be highly competitive on some of these. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have one other information. I spoke with Ken Calvert's office, I guess it was last year, and he was already trying to push the CEQA issue back in Washington to eliminate a lot of the hurdles, since you guys already own, the state already owns the lanes, or the feds already own these lanes, and not have to go through the full CEQAs on each one. I know they're already trying to push that. So I think as a group, we could throw our name into that hat and see if we can push that even farther with him, because I know he's pushing that right now to get that thing passed, so you guys could get things done a lot quicker and not
Okay, so let me
my
just provide a
great-grandchildren.
little bit of clarification to what you just said, because Ken is federal representative, so that would be NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. We, since we are receiving federal funds and state funds, are required to do both NEPA and CEQA. Now, I may be speaking out of line, but there's been a lot of attempts at CEQA reform. The problem I see is that whenever we achieve CEQA reform, there's additional requirements that get placed on projects. So it's not necessarily an effort for streamlining. I think if we were to talk about reform, I think we want to make sure that we're including language about streamlining.
Absolutely.
Just as another.
Hopefully I have my job after tomorrow after I just said that.
Just as another further clarification to this, California legislation is more directed at reducing CEQA litigation too. So as opposed to, like you say, trying to allow for multiple projects to be reviewed at the same time, that this legislation, I believe, is specific to just trying to address the use of, frivolous lawsuits. Yeah.
I think it's going to have to be a reasonable bipartisan approach to this, where it's not made political and show the impact on people's lives on a daily basis. So I'm cautiously optimistic that if we yell loud enough, the wheel that squeaks the loudest gets the most grease. CEQA is one of those pieces of legislation that started out with great intention, but the road to hell is paved with good intention. So at this point, we need to address the issues within CEQA that are causing the problems and see what we can do. And I think you can achieve anything if there's enough of us together in a coalition. I'm optimistic that we can make that happen. From a budget standpoint, looking at this, is there a way for Caltrans to put a budget together on the things that we think would expedite this now, where we can start looking?
Certainly we can look at budgets.
Okay.
We can look at the estimates, and then from there, we can start to look at how those could be budgeted.
Because I think addressing the issue on the northbound 215 at 79 is a huge deal. It is huge. Sir?
The studies you mentioned that would need to move forward to help prioritize these projects, would those be completed by Caltrans, or would they be outside by engineering consultants?
That would probably be Caltrans. I got really, really good staff.
And you would work with Ann Mayer on that?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, any other questions? Thank you very much, John. Greatly appreciated. Great work. Guiding principles. For discussion, Mr. Butler, you're on deck.
Yes, sir, Mayor Ingram, thank you. If everyone will recall, the last time we got together, one of the homework assignments that we got was a result of some feedback we got from reaching out to our lobbyists, and they recommended that we focus the energy of the group into developing some guiding principles. So we asked each jurisdiction to come back and forward their thoughts on a few different questions. Those have been trickling in of late. We've got some documents distributed in front of everybody. It's the one with the colored printout on it. And Betsy's been kind enough to consolidate the comments that we've received. She took the liberty of highlighting in red the common theme or thread that's in each of the comments that we've received. While we haven't received comments from everybody, I think those that did submit did a good job of kind of consolidating and getting the point across. So because these are still coming in and not everyone has seen them, I might suggest that we take the guiding principles document that we've provided to everybody. You can take that back, share with your staff, look it over a little bit, and then we can circle back when this group gets back together with the goal of consolidating each of these underneath the 5 or 6 core principles into a statement that we can all adopt as our guiding principle.
Sounds good to me. Anybody have an issue with that? Mr. Mailing, did you get a copy of that, by the way? Okay, sorry. All right, do we have any questions? Mr. York?
Just to confirm, so on number 7, the big data study that already had been conducted, I don't know if that guiding principle was then to take further study based on the results of that study, or would we also want to consider with 7 to incorporate some of the things that Caltrans leadership just shared with us?
I'm sorry, Dan, I'm not following the numbers.
Would it be beneficial to incorporate the information that was provided?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I believe with this new information we got that there could be a recommendation to press forward with the studies that Mr. Belinsky has recommended we do with Caltrans and identify those core projects.
And we need to keep Ann Mayer in the loop on this and send her the information.
Absolutely.
So that she is aware of what direction we're going in.
Yeah.
Mr. Ciardo?
I'm looking at the collected data, and we're missing some people that are, I think, really critical to this issue. One of us, our friends at Pechanga. Are you guys going to be able to give us some of your input on this?
Yes, certainly. So, oh, that's loud. I recently just apologized for not being at the last meeting, but I did meet up with tribal council. So I'm on the business branch, the Pechanga Development Corporation. So we're actually conducting analysis on our trips per day, trips per week, and trips per month recently with our expansion. As you guys have seen, it seems most everyone is passing by 79 South. We're expecting our capacity with now 1,090-ish rooms to be at about 80% capacity. On weekends, we're at 100% capacity. And during the week with convention, we're at about 85% capacity. So we're just above our budget, 5 to 10% depending on the time of the week. And again, something that was a driver in some of the history was the demand was there. So we had people on property that we couldn't keep. We didn't have the hotel rooms. So now that we have the hotel rooms, we've actually seen what seems to be a decrease of traffic on Pechanga Parkway. And so again, we're going through the analytics, and I started that conversation dialogue with our group, the Development Corporation, as well as Tribal Council, to figure out exactly what kind of analytics we can really contribute to this group and figure out exactly what kind of trips, and again, get down to a real deep study for our benefit and for the rest of the group's benefit.
How long will it take to produce that? Do you have any idea?
Let's see. I want to say we've started. I can get some preliminary information in the next couple weeks, I would say.
And you would deal with Mr. Belinsky's staff on getting that data over to him?
Yeah, I can do that,
Okay.
certainly.
All right, so hearing no other questions, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Nagar, I'm sorry, didn't mean to.
No, that's quite all right. We're talking about some other survey work and incorporating other data. At what point is that going to start to cause some expenses? If it is, we may want to start talking about how we're going to pay for those things. What do you foresee, Mr. Butler, Mr. Thomas?
Well, compiling the guideline information, that's staff time and consolidation there, so that can be absorbed within our operating budget. But when it gets to doing analysis and studies and interpreting the stuff that Jared's team will be putting together, what Caltrans is going to be doing, I suspect there's going to be expense involved in that. I'm not sure what the funding source will be for the studies, for the information that you've projected, whether it's something that this group will have to kind of help put together and identify, or if there's application we can put into funding sources that are available to you guys.
Before you answer, John, I guess what I'm saying is if let's sort of foresee this. If we know that we're going to have some expenses later on in this year, let's say in December or whatever, because that material is going to arrive, then let's deal with it this summer. And if it's going to be the first quarter of next year, let's deal with it before the year's over. Don't want to get caught in a position where we're sitting here with good data we need to analyze and then hope we can find the money somewhere to do it.
So as part of our effort, what we'll do is put together what we would consider a support budget that would be needed to accommodate and identify all the improvements.
When we would expect that, or?
Well, it's going to be more than 2 weeks.
Of course, of course. But I mean, for instance, if we put a budget for that, let's say, meeting after next,
How often do we meet?
every other month.
Yeah, I think the meeting, give me 4 months. Meeting after next.
2 meetings, meeting after
Yeah,
next.
October would be good.
Very good, thanks.
John, can you make sure to sharpen your pencil on that?
Say
Or
again?
all sharpen your pencil on those
Oh,
numbers,
yeah.
please?
My pencil is always sharp.
Okay, because remember, we're a growing region that's struggling. We're looking for money. We got to build Mr. McGee's off ramps and stuff, so we need dollars. Okay, so having said that,
You got a question down here?
oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I apologize.
That's okay. I wasn't at the last meeting either. I was in somewhere, not here. Either Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. As the only representative from an entity in San Diego County, I want to speak up on behalf of the Paula Band of Mission Indians. First of all, you need our logo for your little slide. Also, was there a District 11 Caltrans representative? Some sitting in the audience? Okay. We have data from Paula that we collected on the number of cars that are moving through the reservation in peak hours, especially on Thursday and Friday afternoons, but at this point, it's now a daily occurrence for our intersection at Paula Mission Road and Paula Temecula Road to be completely congested. And as a matter of fact, as I left Paula to head up to this meeting, I passed one of our elder tribal members and told her where I was going, and her home is directly on one of those roads. She said, I can't even get out of my house between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock. They won't let me out of my driveway. There's so many people. So I wanted to just briefly share with you some of the data that we have, what the conclusions were about the number of trips that are getting off at Highway 76, going east on from 15, going east on 76 and taking Paula Temecula Road. Now, I'm somewhat hesitant to tell you this because you're going to realize how many cars are going through Paula, and if they were staying on 15, they'd be making your traffic even worse. But you need to be aware that these multiple trips are taking place in these peak hours and fold those into your analysis of what would be on 15 if people are going to get to Temecula more quickly by staying on 15, which right now they're not. They're saving 10 minutes by going through Paula, which doesn't sound like a lot in the big scheme of things, but when you're in a hurry to get home and you're able to keep moving until you get to the Paula Casino to turn into the village, that's where people want to go. They feel like they're going faster, and they actually are going faster. So this is what our study using Fair and Peers, who I believe was the same agency or the same company that you used for some previous studies, shows that during the PM peak period for the summer of 2017, which was from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., 8% of northbound traffic on I-15 exits at Paula, or exits at 76 to take Paula Temecula Road, which might not sound like a lot, but it's significant. It turns out to be something on the order of 400 cars an hour, which is I love the irony of this number, 6.66 cars per minute. And I'm going to assume, having observed the traffic from my office window, that from 4 o'clock to 5 is not too bad, from 6 o'clock to 7 is not too bad. It's the middle hours. So it's probably a lot more than 666 cars per minute. And that's, again, something to be aware of. I'm willing to share this data so that you can fold it into your analysis for those peak hours and what is getting siphoned off and going through our community.
Thank you so much for that input. And you'll get that to Mr. Belinsky's staff? Okay, fantastic. Okay, meeting to be scheduled for next month. I wanted to get a consensus here. Rather than trying to fight the traffic in the afternoon and everything else, would it be better if we did a midday, a lunch, or a morning meeting rather than late afternoon? So
let's ask Brian. He wants to make sure he's got it whenever he wants it. Whenever you want it, sir.
So we get a consensus to do it earlier, or, you know,
Midday is tough,
you want to do breakfast?
because people work breakfast or morning.
I'd say morning rather than the afternoons. Does anyone have an issue with that? So, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock? Does that work? Anybody agree to do it in the morning? How many would get a hands on that?
9 o'clock would work. 8 o'clock is pretty brutal coming down here.
All right, 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
See the hands for 9?
Yeah.
Okay, those want to keep it in the afternoon? Looks like we're going in the mornings.
And, thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as, revolving the venue, does anybody have any comments regarding that, or?
Well, I want to thank you guys for actually holding it. The problem is, we looked at, you know, even our chamber isn't large enough to actually bring it there. That was an issue that we were having. So.
We'll do it. Our,
Do you have room?
our council chambers can accommodate that. We're not all gonna sit up on a dais, but we could accommodate that.
Situation in Murrieta, you can accommodate everybody if not everybody's.
Right, we could, so.
So we also have to, yeah, you have to talk
Yeah.
Well, you know what, we have a lot of audio visual, and of course you have the microphones and we're filming.
Right.
You know, and those things, so maybe you guys just have a discussion about it. Is that okay, Greg, Pat, Betsy?
All right. Okay, closing remarks,
Just for clarification, so
Mr. Butler?
the future meetings will be all at 9 a.m. I need to circle back and make sure this room is available at 9 a.m. on the scheduled dates. We have it reserved at the 4 o'clock hour, so we'll confirm that
Perfect.
its availability.
But can we just sort of play it by ear?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah, rather than say they're all gonna be at 9, you know,
Okay.
maybe, you know, things come up,
Oh,
summer vacations, you know.
Why don't we
experiment.
ask,
Experiment, how about
Yeah,
that?
exactly.
why don't we ask Caltrans when they can get here? They're the ones in charge of the freeway. Everything's green coming
John
down.
looked,
I got
John
that.
looked content with 9 o'clock.
We just get a CHP escort.
There you go.
All right,
So I do have a couple of, at the risk of getting in trouble with the group, I do have a couple of additional comments. And I know that we're looking at traffic. We're looking at traffic through the valley. I think it's more than Interstate 15. I think we need to look at the local transportation networks, the corridors that exist throughout the valley. Because my fear is we make improvements on 15, that latent demand is going to fill it up overnight. So I think we really need to maybe take a step back and think about what other operational improvements off-system that can be made in coordination with the improvements that I've suggested earlier, so that we are truly addressing traffic congestion.
Okay. Mr. McGee.
John Belinsky's comments are right on, and in the guiding principles, both Murrieta and the city of Lake Elsinore speak to that. It can't all be about the 15 and our interconnectivity in our corridor off of 15. So if we could get Wildemar to join us with that, then we'd have a unanimous consensus on that side.
I spoke to Mr. Benoit.
Okay, we're joined. You like that? I joined us.
Okay, Mr.
Executive
Nagar.
decision.
And again, while I don't disagree with Mr. Belinsky and certainly my colleague here to my right, that all has to be looked at. But I don't want to lose focus as to why we began this effort. We're not here to solve traffic everywhere, because we cannot. We decided that we wanted to chunk it. If we take on the task that we're going to do 5 different projects, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, we'll get nothing done. But if we can start somewhere and then move to somewhere else and then move to somewhere else, that is the purpose in which we started.
Yeah, one of the guiding principles from Murrieta that we had submitted talked about that need to reevaluate the transportation network, just like you were saying, of this entire area, because I don't think the area, when the general plan was done back in, in various iterations, took into account some of the generators that we have now. In other words, wildly successful is what I would call some of the generators that we have now. And so there does have to, because they can do all of those. I was happy to see all the Caltrans stuff, but in my mind I'm thinking, okay, let's just say SB1 passes, that'll be interesting. The environmental people get all their stuff done. They are able to do all of these projects, and we still are so backed up trying to get off ramps onto the peripheral infrastructure, as I think that's how I termed it, that it just doesn't work still. So there will have to be a re-looking at the circulation element, part of a general plan, to determine what else needs to be done, what should have been done, what we have done that can be expanded, any of those things in conjunction with what they're planning, because otherwise it just doesn't work. So that was what my point was when I submitted some of those comments with the thing, was, this doesn't work unless we look at it in the bigger general circulation part. And I think as we go away from the center of Temecula, some of those things are taking shape. The laterals that are coming through Bundy Canyon to Scott, Railroad Canyon to Newport, all of those things are actually taking shape, albeit slowly, but they are, and those are critical parts of this puzzle too. But this puzzle down here needs to have a more focused effort looking at the general circulation. When the eastern bypass was removed from the RCIP back in 2001, that's a big deal. That's a big deal, because that shot to heck all of the mitigating for tremendous growth, and they had even more than they had anticipated. So that whole thing has to be relooked at, and that's, it's not part of. We can't put just this one part in the box and say we're only going to look at that. We have to do the whole thing if you want to solve this, because otherwise it's not going to get fixed.
Thank you, Mr. Ciardo. Mr. Nagar.
Mr. Ciardo, I couldn't agree with you
Mr. Chair,
more.
I happen to agree with Kelly, and it has to be a regional approach to all of these things so that you can get the proper funding in place. And type that Caltrans can look at this and you guys can look at it from the standpoint that what is going to take to solve the problem, but once you identify that, you can take it in smaller bites in order to get it accomplished with the prioritization of the project.
I think this is triage that what we're doing here, and we need to take a look at the arteries that are bleeding the worst and clamp those off now. And I think that comes down to going, look, we need to do this regionally. There's no doubt, and there should be nothing that would inhibit that. But the truck scales, the other areas here that are causing this need to be addressed. The traffic coming in from Corona to Elsinore need to be addressed, and we need to do something about the French Valley overfly and getting those additional lanes we need on the 215. But again, I'm not counting chickens that haven't hatched. I don't think SB1 is going to survive this year. And I think we need to have Plan B. We need to work with Caltrans. We need to work with RCTC, with Senator Stone, anybody we can to find that funding without exception. Because if we don't, we're not going to get anywhere. And if that means fixing 2-3 things now that we can afford, we need to do so, but not take our eye off on the ball on what are the things that are causing these major issues. Mr. Nagar.
Thank you. I wanted to say, as I started to say, Mr. Shardo, I agree with you 100%. And, you know, our two cities haven't met on traffic issues in a while, and maybe it's time to do so. And because we've been very aggressive at a couple of things. We did our own eastern bypass. So we have our own eastern bypass that actually deposits traffic over at Winchester Road and Nicholas Road. And that connects up to Clinton Keith Road that is supposed to connect to the French Valley Parkway and take you to the freeway. We've approved, as was said earlier, the western bypass, which would connect to the freeway that we're doing right now, and that's going to take you to the other side of the French Valley Parkway, particularly when it crosses the freeway. So we have our network in place here in our city, in our circulation element, and we have been getting it built. Now, I know there's sensitivities. We've deposited the terminus right now of our western bypass over up to Diaz Road, and there may be sensitivities of extending that into Murrieta. I understand it goes through some acreage and some of the estate properties and things like that. So I don't know if extending Diaz through there is a possibility. But if it is, maybe we try to get it to be a Tumph Road. I know you have a lot of industrial over in that area and a lot of potential for construction over in that area. But if you're amiable to it, I think maybe it's time we meet up again.
Yeah, that's the discussion for a different committee, and that's just between us. What I'm talking about is the circulation element that was supposed to get cars to and from the freeway, to their house, to their jobs, to businesses, etc., is not working. And it needs to be relooked at so that, you know, there's 3 elements to this. There's the federal element, which is, you know, and the state, the Caltrans element of this, which is the 15. There are the local streets, which is you guys, which is us. You know, each city is responsible for theirs. And then there's the regional, and that's where TUMP funding and those things come into play. And we have to identify what projects are not getting done or need to get on the map or need to be changed so that they're adequate, and that the funding for those is identified so that we know what agency is responsible for funding those. So that's what I'm saying is whatever we're doing, whatever is happening, it's not working the way we had hoped it would a long time ago. And that's why we have to look at it again and come up with a better plan off the freeway, because it looks like Caltrans is coming up with a plan that'll help us out, but we also need to help ourselves out. So that's all.
Mr. Mailing, I'd like to extend the opportunity to talk with the assistant city manager and engineering and maybe set something up to look at the general circulation between the 2 cities and the issues that we may address. that have no cost associated with it to look at, where maybe the two engineers could sit down and have a cup of coffee and go, these are things that maybe we can coordinate with, that we can bring back to our council for consensus?
We can do that. We actually had an initial meeting a couple months ago amongst staff and a couple members of management.
Okay,
Happy to do
fantastic.
that.
Thank you. Thank you. On that note, we're adjourned.
Jolly good.